Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 169 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the podcast and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thanks for downloading and listening. The ALPO collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomena, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon. You can start by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel a little bit more generous, $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. If you want to give $10 a month, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And if you donate $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can find out more at www.patreon.com/observersnotebook. And if you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $22 a year. For more information, find us at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find us on Facebook. So just search for ALPO Astronomy. And this podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now we continue on with our Historic Observatory series. We're going to Lowell Observatory. Enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this edition of the Observer's Notebook podcast, and we continue our series of historic observatories. And today we're talking to Kevin Schindler, the Public Information Officer and Historian of Lowell Observatory. Welcome to the podcast, Kevin.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. Now, before we get into the subject matter, why don't you just give everybody a little bit of background about yourself?
My name is Kevin Schindler. I'm the Historian and Public Information Officer at Lowell. And I've worked here for almost 28 years, so I'm no longer a newcomer, I don't think. I worked for many, many years in the public program, and managed that program, the tours and telescope viewing and that sort of thing. And then in recent years, I wanted to document some of the stuff that's happened in the past. And so, kind of switched gears so I could work on some books and also work in our marketing department to promote the observatory.
Okay. And are you originally from Arizona or?
No, I grew up in Ohio.
Okay.
Outside of Cleveland, 20 miles or so. And then I ended up in Flagstaff via Florida and North Carolina.
Okay. All right. And you've written a number of books and articles, I believe.
Right. Yeah. One of the things when I was in the public program all those years is we have visitors that come here and want something to remember their visit, but we didn't have much in the gift shop that was Lowell specific. So I wanted to do some books about the observatory, and it kind of grew from there. And then, a lot of newspaper and magazine articles. They have a regular column in the local paper, the Arizona Daily Sun.
Okay.
And so, whatever we can do to share the excitement of astronomy with people, that's what I enjoy doing.
Yeah, and I understand you also have a passion for baseball.
Yeah, I'm a lifelong baseball fan.
Okay.
And so I try to get to. That's the great thing about being in Arizona. We have spring training, and so up here in Flagstaff, we're at 7,000 feet, and by February we're getting kind of sick of the cold. You can drive 2 hours south, be in shorts, and watch spring training.
That's always a lot of fun. I've done that in the past too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
That's cool. Now, are you an amateur astronomer?
I guess you could say that. Growing up, I was interested in fossils.
Okay.
In Ohio, there were fossils all around, so I collected my first one when I was 7, picking blackberries, and I was hooked. And so that was the first part of my career was working at the Florida Museum of Natural History in Gainesville, Florida, in the invert paleo division. But then the last 28 years has been astronomy. So instead of looking down, I look up.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. We have ties to Lowell.
Right.
Chick Capon, one of our past Mars.
Right, Chick Capon. Yep.
Yeah. He was in charge of our Mars section for many, many years.
Yeah, he was a student of Clyde Tombaugh's.
Right.
And we have a classic picture of Chick Capon at the 24-inch refractor here at the Lowell Observatory, kind of mimicking the classic picture of Percival Lowell, our founder, sitting in the chair, his head backwards. And Chick Capon used to dress up in old clothes, kind of as Percival Lowell when he gave tours. Back before my time here, I don't think I ever met him. It seems like I exchanged some correspondence with him at one time, but I've heard really good things about him.
Yeah, you talk about that classic image. The local astronomy club here in Ventura, we took a tour in the early 80s of Lowell Observatory.
Yes.
And we went in the dome for the 24-inch Clark, and we all had our photos taken in the exact same pose that you're talking about in the chair.
Right.
It's pretty wild, yeah.
We still, there's a certain safety issue with getting up on that old chair, but we're still able to do that every now and again.
Nice.
And yeah, you have to, especially for amateur astronomers and those kind of in the know with the history. You want to get that picture. It's really cool.
It is pretty cool. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Anyway, so why don't we talk about a little bit about the history of the observatory? When it began and how it evolved over the years.
Sure. Well, we have to go back to the 1800s. A fellow named Percival Lowell, who came from a wealthy family, and a well-to-do family in terms of not just money, but they did a lot of important things. In Percival Lowell's generation itself, Percival was born in 1855. His younger brother would become president of Harvard for 24 years. Yeah. One sister married a relative of Theodore Roosevelt. Another sister won the Pulitzer Prize. And so, the family was success, one of the blue blood families of Boston. And Percival Lowell, he always was interested in astronomy. He went to Harvard, because if you're a Lowell, you went to Harvard, and he studied mathematics. But he did a senior thesis on astronomy, but he didn't study it per se in college, but he maintained an interest. And after work in the family business in the textile mills for 8 years, doing the finances, and then he spent 10 years overseas, immersing himself in Japanese and Korean culture. He came back to the United States in 1894, was thinking, what's the next step? And he decided to build an observatory because, again, he always had an interest in astronomy, but there was an astronomer named Giovanni Schiaparelli who was retiring because his eyesight was going bad. And Schiaparelli famously detected what he called canali and mapped these on Mars during the really good opposition in 1877. And Percival Lowell decided he wanted to pick up where Schiaparelli left off. And Lowell wasn't the only one, but he was one who saw these supposed canali on Mars as evidence of intelligent life. And I think something that I've really realized in recent years is how driven Percival Lowell was to fulfill the expectation that comes with being a Lowell. His father and his father before him and so on really stressed to the family, if you're a Lowell, you don't rest on laurels, you don't inherit the money and just run off. You do something important. And so I think Percival Lowell was driven by this. He didn't found the observatory just for the sake of carrying out, observations of the atmosphere of Mars over time or something like that. He wanted to prove that there was intelligent life on Mars. And if he did that, that certainly would do well for the Lowell name. And in fact, when that wasn't panning out, when he was getting a lot of criticism, he also started looking for a ninth planet that he called Planet X, the theoretical ninth planet. And I think Percival Lowell, he died in 1916. He had founded the observatory in 1894, died in 1916. I think he went to his grave unfulfilled because he didn't make the big mark that he was hoping to. But in hindsight, he probably did better than he could have expected because his search for a planet directly led to the discovery of Pluto in 1930. And so much of the research that happened during his time, like Vesto Slipher being the first person to detect the expanding nature of the universe. And then in later years, of course, the discovery of Pluto, but years later with the proper motion survey, detection of Pluto's atmosphere, lots of Pluto research in later years, asteroids, comets, all sorts of research. And of course, the other side of it is communicating the science. The observatory has a long heritage of sharing science through public programs. Percival Lowell left quite a mark, and his name is remembered more now than perhaps if he had just discovered a planet. And so I think it's sort of interesting when we talk about the early history of the observatory, seeing what drove the founder and what resulted from that.
Interesting. Now, was the first telescope on the hill the Clark?
Actually, that came a little bit later.
Okay.
Percival, to figure out where to set up a site, he sent an assistant named Andrew Douglas and lent him a 6-inch Clark refractor that Lowell owned. And Douglas took this in what was then Arizona territory, along with several instruments for evaluating atmospheric conditions. And so Douglas's job was to do site testing. And again, this is before Arizona was a state, 18 years before Arizona was a state. This is happening. And Douglas went to several locations around the territory, Tombstone, Tucson, Tempe, Prescott, and finally ended up in Flagstaff and decided this was a pretty good location for doing astronomy. And on May 28th, 1894, Percival Lowell arrived in town and started viewing the skies. Initially, he had borrowed 2 telescopes, one from Harvard and one from John Brashear. Those were 12 and 18-inch telescopes. And then after that first year in 1895, Lowell ordered his own 24-inch refractor, and that arrived in July 1896. And in fact, they used it in Mexico initially, and then brought it back here to Flagstaff in 1897, and it's been sitting here ever since. So when people think about Lowell Observatory, and if you go to Flagstaff, you see this big white dome, looks like a big birthday cake on the side of the hill. That's the dome that holds that telescope. That's the telescope most people think of.
Right.
And so it wasn't technically the first, but certainly the primary one that Percival Lowell used.
Yeah, it's quite a unique dome. Inside, you have the car tires around the inside. That, I'm
right.
Sure
it's great to view through because how often can you look through a 24-inch refracting telescope? But also, we've had architecture students come in, certainly history students, looking at the structure itself because it's so unique, and it's one big anachronism because it was used for research for half a century and more, and now it's used for public viewing. We don't do research with it, but you use it through the years, and they tinkered with it and kept adding things. Electricity wasn't original, but it's in there now. You mentioned the tires from Ford vehicles. That's what the dome sits on. There's bicycle chains used for controlling the telescope. All this stuff from different eras. It's really fascinating to look at it.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to use it a couple times. I was very, very, very in awe of the instrument itself, knowing its history. Now, what other instruments do you have up there?
Well, I'll start. We have a couple different locations, 3 different locations really. Okay. We have the traditional Mars Hill site, and that's the site a mile west of downtown, and that's where our visitor facility is. That's where the original site of the observatory was. Right. And up here, we have a 24-inch Clark refractor that you mentioned. We have a 24-inch plane wave, and we also have what's called the Giovanni Open Deck Observatory, which is it's an entire building that rolls back, And when it opens, you have 6 different telescopes,
Mm-hmm.
ranging from a 32-inch Dobsonian down to a 5.5 inch, and different types of telescopes are looking at different things. And those are all public telescopes. That's all for our public.
Okay.
And then we also have on this site the telescope used to discover Pluto, the 13-inch astrograph.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have some other smaller telescopes that are actually still periodically used for research, a 21-inch refractor or reflector, and a couple other ones. So those are the telescopes on this site. In the late 1950s, as Flagstaff grew and light pollution became an issue, we set up a dark sky site when we acquired a 69-inch telescope from Perkins Observatory, and that was reconfigured into a 72-inch. And so we just sold that to Boston University a couple of years back. So, but that's at our Anderson Mesa site, where we have a 42-inch reflector, and we're now replacing a couple other telescopes for research. And then the third site we have, if we go to the early 2000s, it was time again, if we're going to maintain ourselves as a state-of-the-art research facility, we needed a bigger, more modern telescope than the Perkins and the other ones we had. And so we started an effort to build what today is known as the Lowell Discovery Telescope. And that's a 4.3 meter telescope about 40 miles from our main site. So we have the main Mars Hill site. About a dozen miles southeast of that is Anderson Mesa, with a suite of telescopes, and then another 30 or so miles is the Lowell Discovery Telescope. So the LDT, which is the Lowell Discovery Telescope, that's our flagship research telescope now, but we still certainly use some of the others for research. You don't always need a Cadillac to do certain types of research.
True.
And then we also, our astronomers use telescopes around the world. Some of our astronomers study things like the Large Magellanic Cloud, so you have to go to the southern hemisphere. So, our astronomers get time on other telescopes, and astronomers from other observatories get time on our telescopes. Kind of the nature of astronomy and partnerships.
Yeah. Now, how is the observatory funded? Is it public or private funding?
Lowell, since the beginning, is private. So begging, borrowing, stealing, I think that's what nonprofits do. We actually have a pretty rugged fundraising department. Our funding has changed in the last couple of years because of the LDT. Our annual budget went from about $6 million, 5 years ago, and I think it's almost tripled that.
Oh my!
And a lot of that is the cost of operating, state-of-the-art facilities like the LDT. But we have a staff of about 150, and so the research is mostly supported by grants that our astronomers write to, National Science Foundation, different organizations like that, different funding agencies. And then we have our public program that before COVID was generating, more than 100,000 visitors a year were coming. So admissions, gift shop sales. If people enjoyed their experience, we have a membership program where they, have more intimate connection to the observatory. And then we also do a lot of fundraising, writing grants, not just for the science, but to support other efforts at the observatory. And in fact, right now we're in the middle of a capital campaign. Before COVID, we were clearly outgrowing our visitor facilities. A facility that was designed for 60 to 70,000 visitors a year, we were getting 100,000 plus, and the numbers going up. And so we can now officially say next year we're opening our new visitor facility.
Oh,
it's really an astronomy. It's really a science center. It's called the entire name is the Kemper and Ethel Marley Foundation Astronomy Discovery Center. But if you hear somebody say ADC, that's what we're talking about.
okay.
It's a lot easier to see. But it's a 3-story, 40,000 square foot facility.
Oh my!
And it's got a lot of really great features. One of my favorites is a couple 100-seat, theater, I guess you could say, on the top floor. It's we call it an outdoor planetarium. It's a planetarium with the seats tilted back, and you look up, but instead of looking at constellations projected on the ceiling, we're looking at the real thing, because Flagstaff has famously dark skies,
Mm-hmm.
and in fact, the world's first outdoor lighting ordinance was established here in 1958,
Mm-hmm.
and in 2001, Flagstaff was named the world's first international dark sky city. So we're taking advantage of that. Visitors are going to be able to come up, sit in these seats, and look at programs featuring the real night sky. The seats are going to be heated because it does get a little chilly up here. But we'll also have, even when it's snowing or raining, we also have what's called the Universe Theater, which is a 25-foot screen that wraps around something like 160 degrees. And it's going to be an immersive astronomy experience. And so I'm kind of getting on a tangent here, I guess, but
No,
that's another one of our big fundraising things right now. This project now is, with COVID, some of the prices skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was an increase of 300% on some of the some of the materials,
Right.
and so it's the cost is now at 53 million. And so our philanthropy team is they had the original amount raised, and then COVID drove everything up, so they're working on meeting the difference. And so we expect that to open late summer, maybe in 2024 or 2024.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I remember the previous visitor center was not all that large, and
right. If we go back, since the beginning, our founder Percival Lowell really stressed the importance of sharing astronomy with everybody. It's not just the purview of scientists, but all of humankind can benefit from it. We make them co-discoverers. And so from the beginning, Lowell Observatory welcomed visitors. And we had a small place where visitors could come.
Mm-hmm.
But in the late 1980s, new leadership said, we've got more visitors coming, and we also want to be a center, a world-leading center for doing astronomy, making it accessible to people. So in 1994, which is the centennial of the opening of the observatory, we opened the Steel Visitor Center, and that's the one that could accommodate 60 to 70,000 people a year, and that was great. But we've outgrown it, and so with this new science center, we'll still have the old visitor center that we'll use for school programs and conferences and stuff like that. But this new facility will be really the center of the visitor experience, while still we'll have the telescopes of the Giovanni Open Deck Observatory, the 24-inch refractor. That'll still be one of the center points of coming to the observatory. So there's just going to be more to do and more to see.
That sounds exciting. Boy, I have to make a trip out there when you open that new visitor center. That's nice.
It's going to be quite the thing. I mean, we have pretty lofty goals to make it the world destination for astronomy, for the public. And, that comes with a lot of expectation and responsibility. But, we have this strong heritage of science, and we're doing more science here than ever in the past. Lowell has this, people remember Lowell because of Percival Lowell's, canals and the discovery of Pluto and things like that. But we're doing more science today than ever in the past, with one of the most powerful telescopes in the world. So it's exciting to have that going on and to have a venue for sharing the results of that research and just the excitement about astronomy.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, Kevin. What are some of the major science programs going on at the various telescopes up there?
Yeah, well, there's several, really, from the inner solar system going to the outer edges of the universe. We've got a long heritage of asteroid and comet research. One of our astronomers, Nick Moskowitz, and his colleague Teddy Coretta, for instance, they've both been involved, for instance, in the DART mission. And DART is the double asteroid redirect test. That was several months back in 2022, I guess, when NASA sent a spacecraft and it impacted an asteroid moon with the idea of of testing the technology to see if there was an incoming asteroid that could hit Earth down the road, do we have the technology to deflect it away from us? And so this was the first test of one method of doing that. And Nick and Teddy were involved in a lot, because if in order to figure out if you've moved the asteroid or not, or the moon, you have to have a really good idea of exactly where that moon is and what its orbit's like. And so they and colleagues used both the Lowell Discovery Telescope as well as the 42-inch to observe that asteroid system well before the impact and well after. That's still going on now, to be able to precisely measure the motion. And so they've done a lot of other asteroid research, but that's something that's been in the public eye, that people have heard about. There's a team that studies comets, going back really to Percival Lowell's day, and one of the most iconic comet pictures, at least of centuries of the 20th century, was one of Halley's Comet taken from the observatory here, that has included in the field of view, besides the comet, is a meteor and the city lights of Flagstaff, the planet Venus. It's really an iconic picture. So going back to Lowell's day, we've studied comets and discovered many comets and thousands of asteroids that are still being named. If we go out the solar system more, we've got scientists studying Mars and water systems on Mars, how water can form on Mars. The outer solar system with icy bodies. Pluto, of course, we have Flagstaff is kind of nicknamed the home of Pluto, because virtually every major discovery has connections to Lowell Observatory or Flagstaff in general. The planet, the moons, the atmosphere, and so on. New Horizons mission. And so there's a long heritage of Pluto research here, and other icy bodies in the outer solar system. Some of our astronomers work with a team over at Northern Arizona University, which is right here in town, and they have a cryogenics lab where they can recreate the frigid temperatures in outer space and then compare what they're finding in the lab to observations they actually make, in space. And it helps them with modeling and so on. And so that's a really neat project. And then we go further out. We have several different astronomers studying both binary stars and, kind of related to that, looking at exoplanets.
Okay.
And the types of stars exoplanets can be around, not just discovering them, but characterizing them. And we've got one project using the Lowell Discovery Telescope in conjunction with a powerful spectroscope that Yale built called Express, that's looking for Earth-sized planets. So there's a wide range of things. We've some of our astronomers study galaxies, both their formation and then in other cases how they impact each other. Cannibal galaxies, where one slowly consumes another over time. And there's really kind of a wide range of research going on here.
There's a lot of science taking place up there.
Right.
Fantastic. Now, is Lowell Observatory affiliated with any universities in Arizona, or
no? Lowell is a private organization.
Okay.
Our founder, Percival Lowell, I think essentially he didn't want to be beholden to anybody.
Okay.
He wanted to be his own boss. And so now we have affiliations. Some of our astronomers, for instance, have adjunct positions at the university here. And we also have partners on the Lowell Discovery Telescope. So we have 5 partners right now: Northern Arizona University, Toledo University, University of Maryland, and a couple others. And so they eventually, put in a certain amount of money and get a certain amount of time on the telescope. And so that's an important part of operating the Lowell Discovery Telescope. So Lowell has always been a place that we're privately operated and privately funded, but we partner with a lot of organizations, whether it's for doing science or for doing education and outreach, partnering with local schools or with other attractions and museums around northern Arizona. So there's a lot of partnerships and collaborations, and Lowell has always been. It's always been important for Lowell to be part of community, whether it's the astronomy research community or the Flagstaff community or informal science education community. We, don't want to be this, snotty-nosed people on the side of the hill looking down at everybody in the ivory towers. We want to be part of other organizations we partner. So private, but we work well with others. We play well with others.
Okay. Now you mentioned outreach. What type of outreach programs do you have?
Well, we've got the on-site visitor program.
Okay.
Where people can come from around the world and look through telescopes like the Clark 24-inch refractor, and go on historic tours. And at nighttime, look through the telescopes, and our educators give laser shows. Use laser pointers to point out constellations and such. We have astronomers who come in, and visitors can meet them during Ask an Astronomer.
Oh my.
You can walk up and ask astronomer any questions. So we have those programs that are on site, and then we have our school programs, and those are, schools that not only visit here, but we also go on the road and visit schools. One of the kind of a keystone of that effort is a program that's been going on for almost 30 years now. It targets Native American communities, Navajo and Hopi and other tribes. And so our scientists or educators will set up where they go out once a month, say, and do lessons at the school. And then at the end of the year, the students and teachers come to the observatory for an overnight. They look through telescopes, they visit our research facility, and it's a way to inspire students and teachers to learn more about astronomy, especially in underserved communities that don't have an observatory in their backyard, for instance.
That's very
so there's a lot of different things, and then with the virtual world now, and with COVID, that kind of made us all change how we do things. One thing that came out of COVID is we developed a lot of virtual programs, and we always wanted to do that, but didn't have, as we say, that we didn't have the bandwidth to do that. But when we were forced to be closed for a while, the observatory leadership committed to not laying anybody off. Everybody would still get paid, but for our educators, if they're not doing tours and stuff for the public, what do? Well, they created virtual programs. And so now we have a suite of those that are accessible, free. If you go to Lowell Observatory's YouTube page, you find dozens of programs, and people can watch them live or can watch them after the fact. So there's a lot of different ways we reach people, both on-site, off-site, as well as around the world with these virtual programs.
That's great. It's good to hear that they're working with the natives too.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. That's good. So what are some of the future plans? You mentioned the visitor center in a year, but what else?
Well, the visitor facility, the Astronomy Discovery Center, opens in late summer, early fall 2024. And there's a lot involved with that. I mean, this is a major upgrade, and so that's going to ramp up our staffing just for that effort. And then with the Lowell Discovery Telescope, the research with that is going really strong, and it's such a great instrument because when it was built, it was the 5th largest telescope in the continental U.S. But also it's one of the most powerful in the world because it's so versatile. It can hold. Traditionally, if you have a big research telescope, you might have an instrument like a photometer or an imager or something like that, and it could take hours to put that instrument on the end of the telescope. And then, some other scientist wants to use a different instrument to study something else. The telescope's taken down. It takes hours or days to take the old one off, put the new instrument on. With the Lowell Discovery Telescope, it's got what's called an instrument cube that holds 5 different instruments. And so you push a button, and in about 30 seconds, the instrument cube rotates, and the light path now goes through a different instrument.
Huh.
And so you can use 5 instruments almost simultaneously. So, for instance, if we've got a comet like the green comet that made headlines in the last few weeks here, our astronomers can study it using different instruments almost simultaneously, rather than saying, okay, we'll look at it here at Lowell Observatory. Who else can look at this and has time on the telescope? And while we have time allocated on the telescope, we also have the flexibility, because it's ours, to respond to last minute needs, like, oh my gosh, we have this comet, let's observe it. And so there's a lot of flexibility with that. So with the Lowell Discovery Telescope, we'll continue that work. We're looking for another partner who wants to be part of that project. And then also we continue to develop new instruments, depending on what our astronomers and other astronomers want to do with it. And so there's a lot of excitement about the future of the science here. And then supporting all that, we're also both the research and the on-site visitation. We also need to expand our facilities a little bit, because more visitors, more staff. It means we need part of the new visitor facilities, a new parking lot, but we need a new machine shop, because our current machine shop sits right in the middle of what's going to be down the road, the center of the visitor experience. And so we're going to build a new one, and also that's equipped with modern, technology. And in the machine shop, our machinists build things like for our telescopes.
Right.
They've built parts that have gone into airborne observatories, and so on. So part of growth of our mission efforts, which are science and education, and you kind of combine those as communicating science. If you distill our mission down to one thing, you could say it's communicating science. But in support of all that, we need the infrastructure. So the machine shop, and we need a new staff building, because our staff has grown so much. We're bursting at the seams for office space. So that'll be something down the road also.
Fascinating. Wonderful. Okay. Well, Kevin, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I think a lot of folks are familiar with Lowell Observatory, especially members of ALPO. Probably many have visited here, and it's such a unique story, because there's the personality of Lowell Observatory, some of the distinct discoveries, but then long-standing research that maybe isn't as well known, but is still important. But you combine that with all the efforts to share the results and to communicate science, and it's really it's neat, because Lowell is so accessible. As observatories go, it's easy to get here.
It is.
If you want to visit, we're a mile from downtown Flagstaff, and so it's easy to get to. And it's a great resource with both our scientists and educators. A lot of your group may know folks like Brian Skiff, who's been in the field for a long time and is, knows the night sky better than everybody else combined here, as I'd like to say. And so, and you look at some of the past people we've had, like Robert Burnham Jr., who wrote his Celestial Handbook while he was working here. Clyde Tombaugh, who discovered Pluto. Both of them, as well as our founder, were all self-taught astronomers.
Yeah.
And so, to me, it's kind of inspirational that, today in general, if you want your career to do science research, you'll probably go to school and get a PhD and whatever. But there's also, like Clyde Tombaugh and Robert Burnham and others shown, you can have a career or even just a lifelong passion. If you like something, make it happen. And you can make it into career if you want. If not, it's a really good hobby, if nothing else. But I think Lowell is great for showing people that if you have an interest, you can make things happen. Like, Clyde Tombaugh, who was living on a farm with no money. And so he wanted a telescope, so he built one out of farm parts lying around the farm. He made drawings with that, sent them to this place called Lowell Observatory, and they were so impressed that they hired him.
Yeah.
And within a year, he discovered Pluto. And so it's, again, it really, Lowell, I think, is a great place. It's kind of as Dave Eicher, who's the managing editor of Astronomy Magazine, he calls Lowell America's Observatory. And I think it gets to that idea that anybody can come to Lowell and get something good out of it. You don't have to, if you have a PhD, you want to do science, that's great, but you don't have to really get something out of it.
That's great, Kevin. I really appreciate that. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today. It was a great conversation.
Well, thanks, Tim. Really great talking with you. And invite you to come and visit anytime, and I'd be glad to show you how things are changing ever so quickly here at the observatory.
I will definitely make it a point to get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. I again want to thank Kevin Schindler from Lowell Observatory for coming on the podcast today. We upload a new episode of the Observer Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. I really appreciate it. You can also listen to us on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, Soundcloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon Echo, Spotify, and the podcast is also available on our YouTube channel. You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon, where you give up to $35 a month, where you receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. With that, I want to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Siedentop and Michael Moyer, for their generous support. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. If you'd like to get a hold of me, my email address is commentman@commentman.net, or on Twitter @ObserversNBPod. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.